Hello, I hope your coffee is warm because today we are looking at a special edition of a monthly video I make where we are this time looking at the yearly review of Magic the Gathering. So what happened this year? We're looking at some of the most interesting cards, some of the most interesting sets, mechanics, some weird cards that went weirdly popular. And we are reviewing what this year has done for the channel, for me a little bit as well, if you're interested. It's more at the end, but we'll start with some of these sets and the most interesting cards there. And most of all, I'd like to thank you for watching with Swamp Thing, but also reacting and also reaching out, saying thanks for the videos. And well, I'm really grateful to see what some of the videos have done for you. Maybe you have found some new lore, maybe you just found it very relaxing to listen to the videos. So a little bit out of my comfort zone again, I am making a video with video on. So I hope you enjoy. Let's see. Well, I would like to go by every set first and some of the coolest cards that I would say came out of these sets. So, for example, we have Murders at Karlov Manor, which was a bit of a controversial set in that people really disliked the fact that the lore was all about just magic characters that you know very well and them being sort of deformed, if you could say it that way, to be a detective-like person, which is, I think, why people have been starting to dislike Ravnica actually a little bit, and this was one of the most favorite planes that people had. So I think that sucks, but there are some cool cards that came out of this, like Delny. I think is one of them. Mechanically, it's interesting because it works with small creatures, it strengthens them, makes it really interesting. Makes for a very interesting mono white commander as well, which is pretty rare. And I think this flavor for Delny fits with the detective theme of the set, and we really needed some characters that really did fit with that theme. We had well, I would say also controversial. Most of the sets actually are. Which is Fallout. And why is it controversial? Because people don't really like the crossovers, but it was a real set and many people did like it, and I did as well, at least mechanically. Flavorfully, I couldn't really get around this set very well because I didn't play the games, so I could research whatever was happening, but this really didn't feel like one of the sets I could be involved in. But there were some cool cards like Caesar, that's just going white and is a great card for its color combination. But this one really went by me, and I think this is a really interesting discussion for this year, because what to do with a game that you love, but a set that you don't. I am still not really sure, but we try to find a way, and it's just been like this for a long time, where lore has been slowly declining, and we really had to find our own stories at first. Was one way that we didn't really get that much magic anymore. Take a sip of your coffee because we're just talking today, but yeah, I think there's also a thing to say for these kinds of sets where just some people will love what they're seeing. So let's talk about it more today. Outlaws of Thunder Junction was another set that came out. I actually personally love this set. People were really seeing the trajectory of Wizards just printing sets with cool characters and putting hats on them at this point. So in this time it was a cowboy hat that they would wear. But I think it was really fun to see the villains of Magic the Gathering come together in a sort of Avengers-like setting. And I think Bristly Bill is really cool as well, because Bristly Bill and his kind of cactus plant people are a new kind of people that we are getting to see. So I think we got some cool things that are coming from this, like scorpion dragons are also a cool example of this. And of course, who doesn't like +1 counter synergies? We then had we also had Modern Horizons 3. So continuing with Modern Horizons, isn't a lot to say about this, but I personally like these kinds of sets where we are seeing multiple planes through coming through, having them fit a certain type of power level or whatever. Maybe it's for Commander, maybe it's for Modern, and we get a lot of new toys to play with, a lot of new cards, and a lot of new stories that we can mostly imagine ourselves. We had another crossover set, which was Assassin's Creed, which I think, well, there's one thing going on here that is a little bit dangerous. What we have seen in the last set with Marvel is that there were multiple cards that just play around with equipment, and it is logical because whatever else would you do with Captain America and Iron Man? But also, what else would you do with an Assassin's Creed set except for equipment and artifacts? So in these sets there must be a lot of cards that work with artifacts and equipments. So those mechanics will obviously become stronger and stronger. I mean, if we are going to Middle Earth, we are going to see equipments and we are going to see artifacts. If we are going to Star Wars, we are going to see equipments, we are going to see artifacts, and that will be the same every time. So those mechanics will become stronger and might not be something we'd like to see. But okay, I still like Ezio just because of the character and the game that I did love. So sometimes it's a good thing that those crossovers are here, but I usually don't cover them still, even though I love them a lot. I make like 1 or 2 videos about them and that's it, even though they are often very popular, like with Lord of the Rings. I just made a few videos on that set as well, while on, for example, Bloomburrow, I made multiple. So yeah, I choose not to do it, but I think it's cool if people love the set, just go ahead and play it. That's my opinion. That's not very hot take, but it's mine. Bloomburrow is, I think, a set that people really loved. People really wanted to be hyped about the set at this point, I think, and Bloomburrow just filled that part that we all just want to have a set to hype about, a new world to hype about maybe, or maybe exploring a new part of a world that we love. And Bloomburrow did fill the gap of well, being a set about a new world with an authentic story. And that's what we got. We got a simple story as well, one hero's journey about a mouse going to deliver an egg to an owl. But it's still a story and it's still a new story, so I really like this set. We had Duskmorn, which was really authentic, I think, as well. It was a horror story, but again, it did do the hat thing, where it was just a bunch of people in retro horror style. But I think Duskmorn is a really cool, how do you call it, plane? Because it's new, it's a house that lives, and that's just new. And I think I like the creativity behind that part, at least. So that's actually what I expect. It's like the creativity, like the fantasy of finding a new world and learning its rules, and that's what Duskmorn did really well to me. And we got, I think, well, many people are happy, I think, with the fact that we have Foundations now, which is a set all about the basics of your collection, which you can build, and bringing back stories of actual Magic the Gathering and bringing back cards that feel like actual Magic the Gathering as well. I think people liked that part. People have been really happy about just getting what you'd expect from Magic the Gathering. And maybe that is just what we want, and maybe that's just what we should be happy with. So I'm looking forward to multiple Foundation sets, actually. which I think have been done way better than the core sets. Because the core sets had only weak cards, these have some stronger cards. I think it makes it a very expensive set, so it's not really beginner friendly like they were advertising or something, but I think it's really good that we get what we want, which is a normal set with normal cards. I think the best lore to me, weirdly, is from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, because of the way they have put some cool evil people together and made a story out of it. And I think they did really well in fleshing out the characters a little bit more, letting us learn a little bit more about some of the characters, even though, and I think Rakdos is a really good example of this, even though some of the stories of the characters didn't really befit the characters as we know them, but we learned a lot more about them in any case. And that is a part of the mystery there. Why does Rakdos do the things that he does? And why all of a sudden does he love tiny bones that let him ride on top of his head? It shouldn't be happening, because it used to be a very epic thing to be able to ride on Rakdos' head. R.I.P. Gideon. But I think it's cool that we get to see different sides of them and that the characters can still evolve. Moving on to, I think, the best mechanics that we have gotten out of this year, and they are from Bloomburrow. Why is Bloomburrow, I think, the best set mechanically? Well, because we have had these. Offspring, first of all, is a really cool way to improve on a card. So, for example, if you have War Leader, you get the 4 mana 4/4 with an effect, but you can also pay 2 extra to get a 1/1. So in this way you have 2 ways to play your card, either with or without the Offspring, and then you have multiple options and multiple ways to strengthen the card. Also, I really like the idea of having a certain token that looks like your actual card. I think that's cool, and there are now multiple ways to have all of your favorite cards become Offspring tokens. So I think that's a nice added bonus. I think Bloomburrow did really well with translating the type of mechanic where you get to choose. So usually you get to choose 1, 2 or 3 modes or something like that, or all of them for some reason. And I think the paw mechanic, it's called P on Scryfall, I'm not sure, but did really well in just saying you may have 5 balls worth of modes, which means you can make 5 1/1s, which means you can make 3 1/1s and exile 1 target non-land permanent. You have many choices in this way. I think Spree is a similar type of card, but I think this is just more creative. It's very logical and it feels very basic, which I think is good, because then you can do a lot of things with it. We had the talents or the class cards, which are just evolving enchantments, so not really original, but still, well, I think a cool spin on the level up mechanic. And we had Forge, which I think is really creative as well, because it combines mechanics. We have seen it on Outlaws of Thunder Junction with the Outlaw mechanic, but here with Forge you get to exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food, which I think does a lot in the scroll deck. If you have played it before yourself, I think you know what I mean, where you get many choices. Do you exile from your graveyard? Do you fill your graveyard? Do you make a deck like that? Or do you make a food deck or a sacrifice deck or something like that? And there are many ways to build around this mechanic, because it is multi-dimensional already. So moving on, some new kinds of tokens that have been innovative this year. I think we should celebrate the new type of morph that they are working with. So it's a little bit of a change where the morph creatures now have War 2. Not a lot of change is going on there, but it's mechanically really interesting. And story-wise is what I mostly mean. We had bounties, which I think is really cool. Which says, for example here, at the beginning of your end step, if you committed a crime this turn, collect your reward. which can mean multiple things. For example, you can create a treasure token, you can create 2, you can draw some cards, create 2 treasure tokens and draw a card. So not really interesting in the kind of rewards that you get, but I think it's really cool that we are seeing more mission cards, which I think can spice up the games you play with your playgroup. And it's something you need to talk about with your friends, whether you're going to play with bounties, for example. But I think this adds another dimension if your games are getting stale, and I think we should be innovating like that. I think things like this are really overlooked, but they make the game more interesting. So if you feel like you need more with your playgroup, then pick up some of these cards. Or make them yourself, if you want. I think that should be okay. We had the offspring types of tokens, which are basically eternalized tokens, which we already got, but I think they add a lot because they are cute. We had everywhere, which is from Dustmorn, which is just plains, island, swamp, mountain and forest, which should be really powerful. But I think practicing with designs like this to make tokens out of lands or things you don't really expect is really cool as well. And we had a Tarmogoyf token, which should be a happy moment for many people who like the old stuff. Now, moving on to all of the mechanics, we had Manifest Dread. I'm going by these lightning fast, by the way, but let's look at them to just appreciate them for a small moment. This is a really simple mechanic, I would say, but also it has some cool things, because you look at the top 2 cards of your library, you may put one on the battlefield face down as a 2/2, and you may flip it later, maybe if you can, if it's a creature card, and then the other one gets put in your graveyard, so that's a lot of value from there. I think it's a really strong mechanic, and it got a namesake card, which I think is really fun. We had free running from the Assassin's Creed deck, which plays around ninjas and assassins in a different kind of way. We had, of course, offspring, which means now you can put all of your creatures and in your deck that you want, that you love, and make offspring tokens out of them. That makes for a lot of room for creativity. We had the classes, which I told you about just before. We had collect evidence, which I think is a very basic mechanic, so no, we'll not go into that. We had disguise, which was the new morph token that I just talked about. We had forage, which we just talked about as well, which I think was really a good choice, a good mechanical choice. We had plot, which I think was really fun. I'd like to stay with this a little bit longer. It was, for example, 3 mana. You may play this sort of. You may pay the mana cost and then exile the card from your hand, and then you may cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. So that meant that you could play something and really put it down on the battlefield later, but it was free, so you can build up to your big turn and have a big powerful effect. And I think it's really interesting how these types of effects, like playing a card, of paying for a card right now and then playing it later, actually changes what the card does. For example, Outcaster Trailblazer will give you a mana of any color when played. So if you would play it right away, you pay 3 mana, you get 1 back. What are you going to do with the 1 mana? Probably nothing. But if you play it next turn, maybe you play a land, so you have 4 mana ready, and then you get another mana, that means you can play a 5 mana card right now. So I think that changes the card a lot, which I think makes this a really cool mechanic as well. We had impending, which is just a time counter where you need to wait for something to enter, but it was only used on the overlords, which I think is flavorfully really cool that they got their own mechanic, which also feels a little bit scary. We had expand, which is just you pay a bunch of mana and then you get an effect, but you can put a number behind this. So this is a really flexible mechanic where you can, for example, say on the card expand 4 or 5 or 6, doesn't matter, and it can be tuned very well for the designers to make a card that is perfectly fit for your deck and your set and your game style. We had Saddle, which is just a vehicle type of card, but it was not on an artifact that's usually lifeless, but in this case it was on a creature that you could already use, so this makes it more flexible. We had the paw mechanic, which I talked about. We had Eerie, which is just enter the battlefield effect for enchantments, basically, or when you fully unlock a room, but rooms are more interesting than area, I would say. We had Valiant, which we already had, sort of. We had Survival, which means when something is tapped at a certain moment in the turn, you will get an effect. I think that is really interesting as well, definitely with vehicles. We had Cases, which I think is really fun. You need to solve a kind of puzzle to get an effect. We had Rooms, which I think is really interesting. Basically, it's just two sides of an enchantment, but it makes the card more dangerous because it can be removed at once. But it also makes it more interesting because you need to pick which room to play first. Maybe you let one stick in your hand for a bit because you find it to be more important. And it makes it just more flexible, just like double-faced cards do. We had Emerge From, which I think is, did exist already, but now you can emerge from something, which means you may cast a spell by sacrificing the something that it names, like an artifact, and pay the emerge cost reduced by the artifact's mana value. So you pay for the mana value with an artifact and something else. Not really that new, but I think a cool spin. We had Spree, which I think was really cool because it lets you have 3 modes on the card. It makes it more expensive as a total, but you get multiple modes, so you get the choice, which is really strong. We had Mercenaries and we had Outlaws, and Outlaws I think add a lot because now you can put multiple creature types on a certain overarching type, which I think makes for many ways to make more interesting decks and new creature types, which Jasper Flint was as well. We had gifting things, so you gift your opponent something like a card or a fish. Now that I think about it, giving someone a fish isn't really a great gift except for in Bloomburrow. And we had the 2 power smaller mechanic, which was already around, but I think they made it a lot bigger now with Delny and some other cards. And I think Mono White is moving up to be the color about that type. So those were the mechanics. Now we'll go over some of the prices of the day, like the coolest cards, most expensive cards. We have some art that we will discuss way later, and we have the precons that we will discuss. So next up is the segment I will call the coolest cards. Not really a creative thing name, but coolest cards, I think. And I didn't really say this is the coolest, but I have 5. Taiwo Keen is one of them. I made a deck tag about her as well from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and I think what Taiwo Keen does really well is make Boros a little bit more interesting. So what she does is she lets you increase the damage all of your non-combat damage sources deal. So you may pay X mana, and then if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus X instead. So for example, you pump 5 mana into this, and then all of your cards from there that deal non-combat damage deal an extra 5 damage to all those things. And whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to a creature equal to that creature's toughness, you draw a card. And this was a really complex mechanic to explain, but this combination of effects does mean that you can choose to draw a bunch of cards. Maybe you want to use the bunch of damage to kill your opponents right away, and I think this makes for a very strategic way to play Boros, which you usually do not really see. I think Inversion Behemoth is really interesting. It's a 4 mana 2/9, which is already a very interesting body. It's on a Eldrazi, which I think people will find interesting, but the mechanic I think is the most interesting, because it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you switch the power and toughness of each of any number of target creatures until end of turn. Meaning, you get to pick for each creature whether their power and toughness will be flipped or not. And I think this is such a powerful effect that, well, there's a lot to do with this, because, you can have a say over every creature and that makes for a very strategic moment when you are going to attack someone. Now, I think this is a little bit too much to think about, but I think it's cool as well that we jump to these kinds of cards that could be hateable, but that's debatable. I think Obika, Splitter of Seconds, is really cool because it's a Grixis card that doesn't really feel that Grixis at first, but it is all about the one person, Obika, and her ability to change time with her fists. I think the way that she increased single-handedly all the upkeep cards that we have seen is insane in a way. Many cards that aren't really that good with upkeeps are now more expensive because of Obika, and something that has such an effect is to me really cool in one way. Whether it's good is again up for debate, but I think this was a really cool design that works with something that usually doesn't get worked with, upkeeps. And it made them really strong. And it was, I think, mostly popular because of that mechanic. And I would say Silver Quill Lecturer doesn't really feel like something you would say is the highlight of your year, but Demonstrate is actually a really cool ability to have on all of your creatures. So what it says is you may copy your creature spells that you play, and if you do, you choose an opponent to also copy it. So you need to share around that copy, but if the copy is more impactful for yourself than it will be for your opponents, then you can really work around this kind of effect. And I think that is really cool to see on something that is not necessarily a commander, which will already tell you how to play this game, but now it's on a normal card, and I think this will change some of your games so much that it will be a very fun inclusion for a lot of decks. And we have, I think, this ability, which is really cool on Massacre Girl. I think one of the fan favorite characters, definitely that we got from Murders. Well, we had her already, but definitely that was in Murders of at Karlov Manor. And this set also bumped her up in popularity a lot. I think giving all of your creatures Wither is one of the coolest things on this card, because it lets them deal damage in the form of -1 counters, so really reminiscent of all of the Phyrexian abilities that you might have known in your time. But then also, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, so if, for example, they would have been killed with -1 counters, you draw a card. So you can kill many creatures, draw a bunch of cards, and that's just on a mono black card. Next up is the segment where we go into the most expensive cards, and for example this one, as you can see on the right, is just above $60 right now, but it sometimes spikes up to 70, something like that dollars. So really expensive. I would say Ocelot Pride is the most expensive card of this year, and we are borrowing some sorts of cards, like very new ones or cards that are just from a very limited playset that you could buy. So they need to be available, or they need to have been available at least. Like Ocelot Pride. So I think one of the things in this version is the art that's really cool, with the tail swinging around and the cute cats in the background, but also a very forward cat that is staring at us, or something else that is behind us probably. And of course the ability is very strong. So it's a 1 mana card that says, at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you create a 1/1. Then if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that entered the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So you get to double all of the tokens that you are making, and that is a really, really strong ability to have on a 1 mana card for the late game. And in the early game you already have a 1/1 with First Strike at lifelink, which can get very strong, definitely in cat decks. And it will create more cats for you. So I think this is really strong in the cat deck, but also basically in any token strategy. Next up we have, this one did get a different price right now. It's 130 already in a different style. Oh, because that the colors. Yeah, I didn't really look at the colored variations, but this one, the number 50, is right now also $60, but used to be just 54 when I looked at it the previous time. So it's steadily increasing really fast. Vaultborn Tyrant, I think, is very popular because, well, mostly the ability. It's also a mythic that you couldn't really easily get, so I think it's a little bit of a cheat here. But it says when it or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life and draw a card. So basically 7 mana, you draw a card, get a 6/6 and gain 3 life. And then when you play more of the cards you want to play, you gain a card again. And when it dies, if it's not a token, you create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact. So that means that you get the effect all over again. And at least you get 2 cards back from this ability. You had 2 6/6s, and all of your other big creatures get a bunch of effects as well. Ulamog the Defiler. What is this? Oh, we have a 2200 card right here because it has XXX on it. Isn't that something to talk about? Well, I'm wondering, would you pay $2,200? It doesn't say how many euros that will be, but would you pay that amount for a card of which you know that there are only 250 of? I think that's pretty insane. But people love Ulamog, which is one part of why this must also be popular. I think when you cast the spell, target opponent exiles the top half of their library rounded up. I think it's a really popular mechanic from Ulamog, and it enters with a number of +1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. Will mean that as your opponents are exiling a bunch of things, you will be able to have this enter with a bunch of extra +1 counters on top of the 7/7 body, and Ulamog also gets that many for the amount of +1 counters you gained. Annihilator triggers, basically. So it's a really strong card that can get out of control and will get out of control pretty quickly. Doesn't have indestructible, so that's one thing to think about, but $2,200. What's this? Is this something we like? The fact that we get such expensive cards because of the XXX, or basically it will say 5 or something on it. I'm not really sure if we should. Do people keep this? It's really cool to have, but would you sell it? I think is another question. Let me know. Delny is another expensive card, 40. Doesn't really compare to the 2200. Maybe should have looked at that a little bit better. But we have talked about this, and I think it's cool that this alternate art did get some love at least. And it does really fit with the streetwise lookout thing that they got a card that is all about their files, let's say. Bristly Bill is 37. So rounding up this list, I think this is really popular because of the ability to double the number of +1 counters on each creature you control, and that feels like a big thing, so it's probably a Jimmy card, because, how to say again? I think Jimmy is the thing. Next up, the most expensive cards that are not mythic, they are uncommon. The most expensive one is this one, which can apparently get up to $80 of value, but already the normal version is just $13, which is, I think, a lot. This is, I think, a very good uncommon because it goes into a lot of decks. It is 3 mana for an artifact for which you can pay 1 mana and tap it to create a food token, which is already really strong for any food token for a deck, for any sacrifice deck. And it says whenever you sacrifice a food, you create a tapped treasure token. meaning that if you sacrifice one artifact, you get another artifact which you can then sacrifice. So in sacrifice decks, this gets really out of control, but basically this is great for any deck. You can also keep going with that. Isn't there an infinite combo you could do with that? I'm not sure. This one is expensive as well for an uncommon, $7 just above. It's Sink into Stupor. It's 3 mana to return target spell or non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So it's a worse cancel, you would say, but you can flip it to have a land, so it's always something you can use. It could also be a great sort of counter spell to disrupt your opponents. And then the land says when it enters you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. So it could be untapped, which I think is also really strong. And basically this is also a card that goes into any deck, which makes it more expensive. Definitely that's what happens with uncommons that get expensive. They can be put in any deck. Silver Shroud Costume is an equipment that I think many people can use. It's sort of on par with the boots. It has Flash for 2 mana and then will give a creature Shroud. So for 2 mana it's a sort of protection spell, and then the creature can't be blocked either. So this goes into decks like Obika, but any deck that likes your commander to live will be a great option. And I'm not really sure what happens here, but there's a different version that's $52. But I'm not sure about that, so let's skip talking about that. Patchwork Banner from Bloomburrow, just a normal $6 for an uncommon. Says when it enters, choose a creature type, and then they get +1/+1, and you can add 1 mana of any color. Meaning this will give you mana for 3, so it's a little bit of a bad mana rock, but also it will boost any creature type, so this goes into a lot of decks again. And we have the last uncommon, which is Consigned to Memory. It's a 1 mana counter target triggered ability or colorless spell. So works against Eldrazi of course, but also works against artifacts, also works against triggered abilities, which I think can be really strong. And it has Replicate 1, which means when you cast it, you may copy it for each time you paid its replicate cost. So you can counter multiple triggered abilities, which can be really strong in multiple formats, where combos are really prevalent at least. Then onto the commons. I think this is a really interesting one. It's $2. These types of cards usually get pretty expensive, even though they are commons, which they must be, I think. For example, Slime Against Humanity can be put into a deck any number of times you want. You can put in 99 if you want. And it says create a 0/0 green ooze creature token with trample, and it needs trample because it will get big. And then you put X +1 counters on it, where X is 2 plus the total number of cards you own in exile that are Slime Against Humanity. In exile and in your graveyard, by the way. So you can mill a bunch of Slimes Against Humanities, get a really big ooze, and then win the game very easily. Even if those cards get exiled from your graveyard, you still have a game. Battlefield Improvisation is just over $1, so commons don't really get that much value. It says give a creature +2/+2. If it's attacking, you may attach any number of equipments you control to it, meaning you get one creature to be very strong. It doesn't need to be attacking, but I think this really strengthens one creature really quickly, meaning you can probably win over the game with this ability on any creature basically that you have. Maybe you need a strong creature, but probably you don't, because you can put any equipments on it. Jagged Barrens, so these lands that enter tapped and deal 1 damage are really good, and I think in Rakdos it really just makes sense, because in Rakdos you want to deal ping damage. We have Malevolent Rumble, which says reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a permanent from among them into your hand, so you may pick 1 out of 4 cards if it's a permanent. The rest into your graveyard, which is great on a 2 mana sorcery. And then you also create a 0/1 that you can sacrifice to make a colorless mana. So a bunch of things this does, and I think that's why this is really popular at least. And Pick Your Poison is a great flexible card that lets you force an opponent to sacrifice an artifact, an enchantment, or a creature with flying. And just for 1 mana that can get really strong and maybe necessary in some formats. Now moving on to the precons that we got, and let's look at the best ones I would say are out there and what kind of mechanics that we have gotten. We had the Blame Game from Murders at Korloff Manor, of course, which is all about suspecting creatures, goading some creatures, and being aggressive in that sense because your opponents can't block. We have the Revenant Recon deck, which is all about surveilling, getting stuff into your graveyard, playing big monstrous things, and being sort of a sneaky guy. We have Deadly Disguise, which is all about the disguise creatures and turning them face up for having big creatures entering after you reveal them. So it's really your basic Naya deck, honestly. And we have Deep Clue C, which is all about the clues, of course. And we have Morska leading it, giving you no maximum hand size, so clue decks will love that. And whenever you draw your second card each turn, you put 2/1 counters on it. So not really sure what this deck really wants, but we have that deck as well. Then is the Fallout, starting with Scrappy Survivors, where you it isn't actually a survivor deck, but it says, so Dogmeat says, whenever a creature you control that's enchanted or equipped attacks, you create a junk creature token, a junk token, that you can sacrifice to exile the top card of your library, and you may play it. So card draw in Naya is always loved, and Naya players will love dogs, so I think that's a great precon for them. We had Science with an exclamation mark, which is all about energy and artifact spells, of which we have seen multiple decks. This guy you've seen today already. He is from Hail Caesar, and he's called Caesar, and he lets you draw a bunch of cards when you sacrifice other creatures, but isn't really in the sacrifice colors, so a bit weird too. The Wise Mothman has been the most popular for a long time, harkening back to the most popular video a little bit. It's all about milling and the red counters and using them in a really cool way, where usually you don't really get to use red counters in any way. This guy found a way. With Outlaws of Thunder Junction, we've gotten some cool decks as well. I think Quick Draw is one of them, because we had that really easy combo with Stella Lee and having her untap and playing infinite instants and sorceries, which is mostly the hallmark of this deck. We had Desert Bloom, which is all about big land creatures and basically a mechanic that you... Isn't there a lot of Naya in this in these precons? Is that just what people love? We had Steal Your Opponent's Deck with Grand Larceny. We had Outlaws with Most Wanted, because that I think was one of the most interesting mechanics of this set, so they needed a precon about it. We had Eldrazi Incursion, which I think was one of the most popular decks that we have seen. It makes Eldrazi even bigger, so that is interesting, because who thought they could? We had Graveyard Overdrive, which gave us the Lorgoyf or the Tarmogoyf tokens, and it is all about the type of Lurgoyfs. I think people really like the lore of these as well, but was less popular than the Eldrazi, and very easily. And we had Tricky Terrain, not even the last one, but this was a little bit of a weird game type or precon type that was all about making stuff into everything. So not really sure this really hit a lot of people in the I want this deck category. And we had Creative Energy, which I think was really cool, which was all about creating tokens of stuff and about being an energy deck again. So that's a returning mechanic. Not really sure how they are working towards those types of archetypes. Like we have seen 2 energy decks already, but why do we see those? Are they trying to make it a strong archetype? Maybe that's the case. But then we had Bloomburrow, which was all about certain creature types and being cute, I think. The Scroll one was all about copying your tokens. I'm saying was, but it's still not that long ago that we got it. Copying tokens and trying to have them be squirrels, but didn't really succeed there. Bellow was is, I would say, really popular. Animating big enchantments mostly feels really cool to people because then you can play your big enchantments and still protect yourself. We had the card that made, whoa, $300 for a version of this one. We had a card that made, helping your opponents a good mechanic, because it strengthens you more than it does your opponents. Basically, that's what you need for group hug deck. And we had, I think, one of the most cool decks, which is Family Matters, which makes all of your creatures offspringable. And then Duskmourn, last but I would say not least, where we had Miracle Worker, of a deck of making your big enchantments cheaper. We had Jump Scare, where you're just trying to get a bunch of stuff in your graveyard and then make creatures turn and flip and have big creatures on the battlefield, basically Simic. We had Endless Punishment, which is all about being a Rakdos deck that's actually good because it draws you cards by pinging your opponents. And we had Death Toll, which is all about minning cards and getting them back from your graveyard, which you can guess from the colors as well. So not really a lot of interesting things out of this set, I would say, mechanically, but still fine decks to play with and have fun with your friends with. And I would say the best out of all of these is Family Matters, because again, it enables you, this commander does, to have a bunch of cute tokens be made for all of your favorite creatures. Next up is the most played cards per set. First of all, Leyline of the Guild Pact, apparently most played in its color combination. Of course, it's 5 colors, and basically you should play it in a 5 color deck, because it says each non-land permanent you control is all colors, and lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. And maybe you can start with it on the battlefield. So that's perfect for your 5 color decks, where this will basically fix everything for you and will just give you upside for the rest of the game. For Fallout, we have Mutational Advantage, a Simic card that says permanents you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible. And in Simic you have a bunch of +1 counter synergies and at least many ways to give your creatures +1 counters. And giving them indestructible, hexproof, and preventing all damage that would be dealt to them this turn is really good already. And then also it has Proliferate, so it does everything you need in the Simic deck. For Outlaws of Thunder Junction, we have Annie Joins Up, which is a damage spell but also doubles your legendary creatures' triggered abilities. We have Sink into Stupor, which we have seen before, which is a land and a sort of counter. From Assassin's Creed, we have Arbaz Mir, apparently, which is a creature that says... Is this the most... Yeah, that says when it or another non-token historic permanent enters the battlefield. So could also be artifacts or sagas. Arbaz Mir deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. Very basic one, I guess, but people really didn't like the unique mechanics, I'm guessing. Patchwork Banner, because it works with every creature type. And Withering Torment, which is a great destruction spell in black, which is really nothing new, but still can be used anywhere. And also another way for black to destroy enchantments, which I think makes it most popular. Did it need it? Is my question. Then the most played commanders per set. For Murders at Karlov, we have Foja, Jaws of the Conclave, again Naya, because people love it apparently. And mostly it's a really strong card. It says whenever it attacks, put X plus 1 counters on each creature for every elf you control and draw a card for every wolf you control. So it's multiple tribal again, and I think people like that. But also it's just really strong because it can make your creatures really big and draw you a bunch of cards. The Wise Mothman was the most popular for Fallout. I think mostly because people like Mill, but also some people really like the lore of the Wise Mothman. And I think... I'm not going to say that. We have Obika, which was definitely a knockout of the park card because of the way she changed upkeeps forever. We have Ulalek, I think, which was really popular because you get to copy a bunch of triggers and abilities. We have Ezio, which is the most popular commander for there, maybe not the most popular legendary creature, but it gives your assassin spells free one running, which means you can play them for cheaper, and it's a way to have a player lose the game eventually if you have all 5 colors, and it is a 5 color commander because it is. And we have Flops the Fool, which is a very cool spin and very unique mechanic as well, because you need to play with an empty hand basically for the rest of the game, but you get to draw or use a bunch of cards from the top of your library. And then Valgavoth was the most popular from Dustmourne because it changed the color combination Rakdos, because it gives it a bunch of card draw for just pinging your opponents, and you don't need to lose 20 life to draw 3 cards. Next up we will look at the art, and then I will do a bit of review and looking forward to 2025. The coolest art cards I think are, for one, for the common good, because here you see, do you see this? Maybe I'll go by. I haven't thought about this honestly, but I think this is a really cool art because you see the bunch of creatures here. I think not many people have seen this, but you see a bunch of creatures like the small bumblebee, you have the small birds, you have the others, all of the basically Bloomburrow creatures are in here. You have the froggy, you have the little berries flowing around, and it's just so playful and so free and peaceful that I really love it. We have who I call Eluge, who is just a big fish, but I really love how the water plays with your eyes, and it really feels atmospheric as if we are in a cavern of some sorts. And have you seen how this thing works? Because this is its eye. Yeah, that looks really dark, doesn't it? We have Etali, which I mostly love because of it being from the same artist that made the first Etali, and it just seems like such a fun way for them to make this creature again. It's such a cool character as well, or it's becoming one, with the electricity that works with its spine back, and apparently it can run on 2 feet. I didn't really register that before. We have the Lion Umbra, which is I think really cool because this guy is from Garenbreak, and you can see it from its clothes, and they really value strength, and I think the lion is a great example of strength. So this really feels like a peaceful art, but also one that is really inspiring for people who love Garenbreak. Maybe they want to feel strong, and this definitely shows strength, but also a kind of kindness that I really like. Redemption Arc is really cool because it's so conceptual. It's an assassin, as you can see here from this part, that sort of morphs into being a detective and basically telling the story of them going through their redemption arc by becoming what they feared most, I would say. We have Victimize, which is a really dark card where someone is being eaten by their nightmares, and you can really imagine how that must feel. We have Lazav, which I think is really interesting because you see all of the wanted posters in the background, which I think is a really cool way to show that Lazav is being searched for, but also that he can turn into multiple people, which I think many people already knew, but I think it really is a great Easter egg for people who do, because of all of the blue eyes that keep returning. And we also learn a little bit more about how to defend ourselves against Lazav, and that's a rarity these days. We have these types of arts, which I can't really show apparently, but maybe like this. It's about Journey to Nowhere, because someone in the bottle is getting sunk into the ground and we are really wondering how they got there. And I think that's a really fun thing for art to do, making us wonder about the story even though there is none on the card. Prismatic Ending is a really cool conceptual piece, because, well, they're really being ended in a swirl of colors, and the colors are maybe taken away from them because they are going into a black hole, and the art just looks really cool to have maybe on your wall or something even. I think that's a really cool thing to have on a magic card, and as a card it also looks great, definitely when you look at it in a way like this in a full art. And last but again not least, because it is in the top 8, 10, something like that I made, because this is a really great art of showing the darkness of Duskmorn. You can really feel it when you look at this, and maybe zoom in a little bit to get rid of the 2024. Now really are we looking at this for the last card? Wait, let me greater good. Oh. Well, here you go. Something like this. Let's look forward to 2025. So what will we get? We have the foundation sets, which I think are really interesting. Can you read this? Can you read this? La Vita e Bella. But foundation will be the core of our existence for the coming year. That's one thing. We have Aether Drift, which is all about racing each other and probably vehicles and burning with Chandra. We have Tarkir, which will show us a real world again, a real feeling, magic world. We have Final Fantasy. We have Edge of Eternities, which is all about the Star Wars vibe. And then Spider-Man and something else that is probably Marvel as well. Those will be the sets. I think I'm looking most forward to Tarkir the most, like many other people who mostly love the magic sets. For Slowly, there will be not real changes, I would say, but I have seen that you really like the videos like the Lore of Precons videos or the lore videos where we are exploring niche examples of things that happen. I think I will do more of those, or yeah, well, I will. And we will be finishing the idea of the guild videos that I had for such a long time. It's a really hard video to make, honestly, because it takes a lot of time, but it will be really interesting. And I will be doing more how to build videos, like how to build a certain color like Mardu, or maybe how to build aggressive decks or stuff like that, because I think it really helps people who are deck building to have a sort of basis to build around, and it gives me a little bit more, let's say, authority to say more about deck building and deck decks. And that was it for my looking into 2025 and looking back at 2024, mostly all of the cool cards that we have seen. And again, I'd like to thank you for this whole year of supporting me. Even if you got here a little bit later, I'd like to thank you as well, even if this was the first video, which, well, still thank you. And I wish you a very nice year. Bye.